Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to the 20 and 20 podcast. We're going to get right into part 2 of our interview with Super Agent David Falk.
So much of the salary is slotted because in the lower positions also, right? Not just the max, but also
the minimums. Sure.
Minimums also.
Of course.
Well, David, I got a question for you now. I want you to be completely honest.
I'm always completely honest. If I can't.
No, but this is because it's not just about you. Well, when I had that Rudy Tomjanovich situation, you probably knew the truth of what really happened, but it was back in '77. Okay. Now, when I went to trial, well, it was a trial. David was down there in Houston with me. And I said, after the first day, the attorneys, it wasn't only you, but the attorney you guys had hired for me said, well, we have a good shot at this. I looked at the jury. I heard what they were saying. You were like a wild dog. You just went and the Lakers didn't control you. And after this, I said, David, we don't have a chance. And we were eating lunch. I said, we don't have a chance. I said, did you look at the jury, how they were looking at me? Like if they had a hang the noose, they would have hung me right there.
No question.
The way they were talking. But now here's the question, David. Now, Kevin Cooner is the one that started the whole confrontation with an elbow to my face and then punched me in the face. Okay, I have nothing against him, just like you with Donald Dell. I mean, that happens in basketball. So I'm in a fight with him, and then Rudy runs behind me. Now, back then, they didn't have cameras everywhere seeing what was going on. So all they see was Rudy running at me, and I'm turning around and hitting him. Well, I knew then I was in trouble because when he's laying there, because I was leaving the game, and one of the people that worked in the car area where we parked our cars, they said, oh, Kermit's going to be okay because he was running at you. I said, listen, it's not going to be okay. So now my question to you, David, and you might know, why did Kevin Cooner come with me to everywhere I went after that? Now, I want you to be honest because he came with me to San Diego.
You're right.
Then he went with me, to Portland. And he wasn't that good of a player. And they were sticking him with me, in my opinion, David, so I wouldn't sue the team that he was with because of the same way that they sued me. He's the one that started the fight. Can you explain that to me, what went on in your office with Donald Dell and everybody, please?
Well, I mean, I don't have the exact answer to the question, but my answer would be it's obviously politics. The league created a situation to keep the two of you guys together. This, as you know, Kermit, I love you to death. We've been together forever. The severity of the injury is what caused the severity of the penalty. If you had done exactly what you did, but you grazed him and you got a black eye, you would have been suspended for 60 days. If I gave you an analogy, last night there was a horrific injury in the Bengals game, and that's going to cause the league. There was a horrific concussion with Tua in Miami, and they let him play. When you have things that are that dramatic, it forces people to change the way they look at things. And that's what happened in your case. Now, ironically, I'm going to take you back 60 days before, I was at the very first game of the year. In 1977, we represented Marcus Johnson, the National Player of the Year from UCLA. Mm-hmm. The Bucks are playing. The Bucks had the number 1 pick in the draft, Ken Benson, who's one of the great white hopes from Indiana. They gone undefeated. And obviously the Lakers had Kareem. So
I was a starting forward.
We're in the Pfister Hotel. I came out to see you, and obviously Kenny Carr was on your team and Marcus Johnson on Milwaukee. And in the coffee shop at the Pfister the day before the game, Kareem is reading whatever the Milwaukee newspaper is, the Journal, and there's a huge article profile on Ken Benson. And Benson is interviewed. He says, I'm playing one of the greatest centers ever tomorrow. And whatever it takes, I'm going to do to establish his respect. So less than 2 minutes into the game, third possession of the game, you guys have the ball. Lakers have the ball. the ball's coming into Kareem in the post, and Benson's fronting him, not playing behind him. And he takes his elbow and he smashes him in the solar plexus and knocks the wind out of him. And Kareem, when he recovers, has a punch that comes from the ground up, knocks Benson up in the air, and that was the end of his career. Now, Benson 100% precipitated the fight, 100%. He gave him a vicious elbow, could have hurt him. 60 days later, you had the incident in Buffalo with John Shoemate, when the whole team
You
jumped.
remember that?
Of course, the whole team jumped on your back.
Jump me. Yeah.
I know. You had like eight guys on your back, and so the game was a lot more violent back then. But in neither of those incidents, the Benson one was pretty serious, but the Tomjanovich thing, unfortunately, the severity of the injury dictated the severity of the penalty because the league was put into a corner. It might not have been fair. Why Kevin wasn't disciplined, I think you probably know the answer to that question.
We know.
I'll tell you a great story. It makes me think of a great story. Sunday, Kermit, with my college roommate and his wife and my wife, we toured the African American Museum in Washington, and it was absolutely fabulous. I mean, we only there for 3 hours. You need to be there for about 3 weeks. It's an amazing, and as a white person who lives in a very black environment in my business, when you see the museum and you see the whole history of slavery and the Jim Crow laws, it makes you feel, how could people be so ignorant and mean, over hundreds of years? And unfortunately, I think we're sort of going back to that a little bit now, with the rise of a lot of these, white supremacy groups and things. But I had lunch with Bill Russell in Washington about 7 years ago. Now, when I got into this business, Bill Russell, like Michael, is a giant of a man. He's really intelligent. He's incredibly successful, 11 rings. And he wouldn't even look at me. I'd go up and try to introduce myself. He wouldn't even give me the time of day. And I wasn't offended because I was a nobody and he's Bill Russell. But one day, John Thompson took me to breakfast and he brought Russ. And when Russ realized how close I was with John, it completely changed the way he looked at me. We actually became friends. And so he invited me to lunch on Martin Luther King's birthday when he was doing some stuff in Washington. And he told me a story. He talked about like racism in sports. In his last 2 years at the University of San Francisco, Bill Russell won 55 straight games with Casey Jones, 2 national titles. He averaged a triple-double in rebounds, block shots, and scoring. Then he went to Melbourne and won an Olympic gold medal. And he came back, and his coach, Phil Wolpert at the University of San Francisco, said, "Russ, would you like to go to the banquet that's honoring the Northern California Player of the Year?" And he said, "Is that me?" They said, "No, it's Darryl Imhoff from Cal."
Oh, my God.
Now, what do you have to do to be the local Player of the Year? That's more than winning 2 national titles, 55 games in a row. And how many people in the history of the NBA, you think that there are 3 players that won 2 national titles, an Olympic gold medal, and average a triple-double? I don't know if there's any. He may be the only guy to do that. And obviously, the fact he didn't win was a product of the times, it was a product of racism. And it was so obvious to him, like, it wasn't like he was surprised. He learned that that's the environment he was living in. But listening to it, it made my stomach turn. Like, how, whatever your racial mindset is, when a guy wins 55 games in a row, it's nothing to think about. The guy's National Player of the Year. And the fact that he didn't even get the local Player of the Year shows how backwards people were. It blew my mind.
Well, you threw it multiple times because you had that instance, you had the Rookie of the Year also, right? I don't think he got the Rookie of the Year. MVP, there was another time where it was obvious that he was the better player. So
great. I'll tell you another great Russell story, Kermit, that he told me. I love to tell stories, as you do. So when you and I get together, it's really hard to see who's going to tell more stories, me or Kermit and T.O. Like we both love to tell stories.
Uncle Remus stories.
So anyway, but like I tell this to my brother. My brother's a big sports fan. He loves the Celtics, and he wants to know why the guys don't want to beat him as a fan. I said, Mitchell, they don't want to be bothered. So like I told when I meet someone like Russell, who you're only going to see, God bless his memory, you're not going to get to see him very often. And he has so much a wealth of knowledge that he can impart to you. I feel the same about John Thompson. I don't do it, but like on this part of your finger right here, if I could put it in front of the camera, right here, I could write 4 words: shut the blank up. Just sit there and listen.
Yeah.
And these guys get it. So Russell told me the story. He told me stories. A rookie on the Celtics, and Auerbach had a rule that all during timeouts, every member of the team had to stand in the huddle. So they're playing the Lakers. I think the Lakers were probably in Minneapolis back then. They might have just moved to LA, and they're getting crushed because Auerbach is playing Russell at the high post as opposed to the low post where he normally plays. So the first time out, Russell goes and sits down on the bench. And he says to me very humbly, Auerbach had every right to suspend me, to fine me. I was blatantly breaking the rules. But because Auerbach was such an amazing manager of human nature, and the relationship between the two, even as a rookie, Auerbach had so much respect for Russell. So instead of chiding him, he turned to Russell and said, "Russ, why aren't you in the huddle?" And Russ said, "Oh, coach, I didn't think you wanted to have a center in the game." And so after the timeout, Auerbach put Russell back in the low post, so they won the game. Now, it takes a certain, to me, that's coaching and mutual respect. It's not a player cursing the coach out or sitting down and pouting like modern players tend to do. He was giving him a subtle message in a respectful way. He didn't want to embarrass him. And Auerbach was smart enough that he didn't say, "Well, freak, I'm the coach, I can play anywhere I want," which he can, but they're getting crushed. And he moved. And I think that is, I loved hearing that story. And he told, Russell tells me he's cackling with the laugh. It's just, it's heartwarming, but it's really instructional.
Well, you know what? Red Auerbach has to take a lot of credit for really changing the NBA with the racial situation. And Red Auerbach, I don't know, Dave, if you know this, I met him when I was 17 years old. His daughter, Randy Auerbach, went to American University when I went, and Pat went. So they were friends. So one day we were going to take her home. She needed a ride home. We did not know her dad was Red Auerbach. So we took her in the house. She says, "Come in," and got brownies and stuff like that. And Mrs. Auerbach was there. But in my opinion, I always thought that Auerbach lived in Boston, but he lived right over there in Northwest Washington. So we're in there, and I walk into his house, and I see all of these jerseys, all of these trophies. I said, "Who is your dad, Randy?" "Well, Red Auerbach." I said, "Oh, let's get out of here. Please, hurry up." As I turn around to leave, he walks in the front door, Red Auerbach, and I was 17 years. He said, "Sit down, young man. I want to talk to you." He says, "Who's your favorite player?" I said, "Oh, Bill Russell." "Oh, I like you now. Sit down. I'm going to talk to you." I wasn't going to say nobody else. He says, "Can you play?" I said, "I can play a little bit, sir. I'm okay." He says, "I'm going to keep an eye on you then, son. But I want you to come to my camp in Marshfield." He had to Marshfield to bring the pros in and everything. So I go to his camp, and it cost me $45, David, to fly up there. So I had to work during the summer. And so I worked, and you went as a camper. Adrian Dantley was there. Jim Brown. No, excuse me.
James Brown.
Brown. James Brown. James Brown was a counselor. We all were counselors. Tom Bertelson was a counselor.
Wow.
So I worked all week, and those kids are having me up from 7 o'clock to probably 12 at night. But we were playing against the pros. We as the counselors would play against like Dave Cowens, Charlie Scott, JoJo White, and all them would come. So I played well. He said, "Well, I'm going to keep an eye on you." He said, "I'm going to keep an eye on you." Now, at the end of the week, it cost me $45 to fly up there. What do you think that he paid us in salary for that whole week?
$10.
$25. I said, "Red, I'm losing money." He said, "That's a lesson you need to learn." I said, "Red, I'm losing money." He said, "Well, you learned a lesson." But from that point on, he would come to the games. And when I got into trouble with the fight with Rudy Tomjanovich, well, it wasn't a fight with Rudy, it was with Kevin Kunik. They're the ones that picked me up. He said, "I want Kermit on the team." Because I was out, I thought I was going to be out the league. And you weren't with it, David, but listen to this. When Donald Dell took me up to see David, no, it wasn't David Stern, it was
Larry O'Brien.
Larry O'Brien.
Larry O'Brien.
Okay. I go up there, and Dave and Donald said, Kermit, please don't say anything. I go up there, and they start berating me. I said, listen. I said, Dave, to Donald, I said, I'm not going to listen to them talk bad about me and how bad I am. I said, I didn't start the fight. And I told him, I said, if you want to throw me out the league, well, throw me out the league. I said, I'm not going to say, we want you to apologize in the newspaper, a big article. I said, no, I'm not doing that. I said, I'm the one that got punched in the face and elbowed in the face. And I'm sorry that Rudy Tom Johnny got hurt. But I mean, I saw him running at me. When you grow up in the inner city, we're not talking about suburbs. If somebody's running at you when his buddy is trying to beat up on you, well, I thought I was being attacked. And then, so Donald kept trying to hit my leg. I said, no, I'm not going to apologize to anybody. And then they finally turned it around because I think Donald said, well, they don't bring me back in the league. It was going to be a lawsuit or something like that. But Red Auerbach picked me up. And he says, no, we want Kermit. Now, I was a nervous wreck. Now, I'm usually not a nervous wreck. But when I went to Boston, and he did a really nice article, Bob Ryan, a front page of the sports, Kermit Washington's coming. They did a really good article about making me more comfortable. When I get there, it's a blizzard. 1977, it's a blizzard where you couldn't even drive in Boston. And so Red Auerbach says, Kermit, you can stay in my condominium. I said, Red, I'm not staying in your condominium. If something goes wrong, I don't want to stay in your condominium. He says, no, I'm not there most of the time. You can stay there. I said, thank you, Red, but no, I don't want to stay there. So he put me in a hotel, which was just like what you're saying. It was perfect because it was the Sheridan Prudential Center, and it had 29 flights. And I had my weight vest, and I would run it 10 times every day. And because they didn't practice, we had Havlicek, Dave Cowens, JoJo White, Dave Bing. Everybody was older, so the practice.
How about Sidney Wicks and Curtis Rowe? Were they on the team?
Yeah, but they were there, but they were younger. But we didn't practice hard because the older guys it was coming to an end. So I knew what I had to face. When everybody booed me, threw stuff at me, I couldn't order food on the road. We're not using my name because people said they might poison it or whatever. So it was nerve-wracking, but I went to Boston, and my first game, the first game was in Golden State. I'll tell you a funny story. I said, Sachs, how many, because I hadn't practiced for three months. And because of the stress, I was worn out because everything was negative. I said, Sachs Sanders, how long am I going to play? Oh, Kermit, we'll play you about 10 minutes or something like that. He played me for 35 minutes. I couldn't stop sweating. I was so tired. I said, well, Sachs, he was a really good coach. Really good guy. I don't say he's a great coach.
Who was the coach?
Sachs Sanders and Casey Jones was the assistant.
I love Sachs Sanders.
And I said, why did you play me so long? I couldn't stop sweating for like 4 hours. I mean, it was just pouring off of me. And I said, why do you play? He said, well, you're playing so good, I'm just going to leave you out there. And I did. I had not a great game, but 11 points and 15 rebounds. And I hadn't played at all. I hadn't even really practiced. But good guys, Red Auerbach, what he would always come in and say, I want you to hustle. I don't want any fake hustle. He says, I can live with us losing. I don't want fake hustle. Now, he really was good to me. He says, Kermit, let's go out to dinner after games. I said, Red, I can't go to dinner after games. I'm tired. So he would just flick the cigar ashes at me and walk away, because we got along really well. And he always wanted me to go out to Chinese food with him. I said, no.
Oh, I love Chinese food. Yeah, it's famous for it.
I said no, Red. But now a funniest story though, Havlicek's last game. We're not a good team. We're getting beat every game. Now the final game is Havlicek's final game and Dave Bing's final game. And he comes into the locker room. He says, if we don't win this game, I'm going to kill you all. I'm going to kill every single one of you. And he's serious. He was serious. He said, and I said, oh my God. And then Havlicek had to check Randy Smith, who was one of the best players in the league. I said, Havlicek, are you sure that you want to check Randy for your last game? He says, I'll check him for last game. And the first half, he didn't play that well. The second half, Havlicek must have had 25 points. Yeah. The play went crazy. And so I just want to tell you, David, first of all, I know you got to get out of here.
No, I want to tell you one more story. You may grab a
please. And so Red Auerbach said, and then, and tell us about, did you understand about the franchises switching back then? Buffalo and Boston, and he
And
said
the Clippers. And the Clippers. That's how the Clippers got formed. Irv Levin switched to Fred. But I want to tell you a story about Satch. So I didn't know Satch very well. But in 1980, a guy used to work with me named Emmy Costello had moved back to Atlanta. And he was friendly with a young guy who went to Princeton, a really, upper crust kind of a guy, who was a tennis player named Speedy Howell. And he wanted to become an agent. And his first client was a guy named Brooks Steppe from Georgia Tech. And Richard was very smart, but he didn't know much about the business. And I helped him with the shoe deal. So time went by and he started getting a bunch of tech clients. He represented Bobby Cremins. And he was a pretty arrogant guy. People thought I was arrogant, but I didn't go to Princeton. I didn't grow up in that kind of, upper crust environment. And so in 1992, we went down to 1991. We went down to Georgia Tech to meet Kenny Anderson. And Kenny loved Lon Rosen. I like Lon Rosen. Lon and I are friends. That's Magic's guy. And so he wanted to pick Lon. We probably came in third, and Bobby made him go at Richard Howell. And Richard, everyone knew Richard and Kenny just didn't click, So he got drafted number 2 by New Jersey. And by the end of his third year, everyone knew that he was going to fire Richard, including Richard. So Richard, sometime, I guess, towards the end of his 4th year, tried to negotiate an extension for Kenny with the Nets. And they gave him a 5-year extension for $30 million, but only 20 was guaranteed. On Christmas Day, Kenny fired him, and his accountant called us up and said, he'd like to meet you. So we went up and we signed him, and we had nothing to do with getting fired, zero. He just didn't like Richard. So he's on the Nets, and I was friendly with the owners. We had a lot of players over the years on the Nets. So I went up to the head owner, Alan Offseed, and he said, David, what do you want for Kenny? I said, Alan, honestly, I'm not sure he even wants to stay on the team. So let me sort of get the label out. I'm not new on the job. I don't want you to make an offer and have me turn you down. It's a lot of money. And we probably could have gotten him $8 million a year from Jersey. They really wanted to keep him. So I called him back a few weeks later before the trade deadline. I said, Alan, look, Kenny really doesn't want to stay on Jersey. So they traded him to Charlotte at the trade deadline. He finished his last year in Charlotte, and Charlotte didn't even try to sign him again. And as a free agent, we signed him with Portland for 7 years for $52 million. Richard then sues Kenny and says that his deal with $20 million guaranteed set the table for the $52 million deal in Portland. And he hired a lawyer from a big firm, King and Spalding. And I had what they call intervene, Kermit, because under the rules, Kenny can only pay 4%. And whatever Richard wins in this lawsuit against Kenny comes out of my fee. And Richard had freaking nothing to do with the deal. So I hired a lawyer from Newark, New Jersey, Jerry Crovaton, who used to do some work for the union. And so Richard's lawyer writes to the arbitrator, and he said, I'm from Atlanta, and as we like to say here in the South, Mr. Falk has no dog in this fight, meaning it's between Richard and Kenny. So my lawyer writes back and says, I'm from Southern New Jersey. As we like to say here in Southern New Jersey, every dog has his day. So the arbitrator completely threw out Richard's case. They didn't even hear it. So about a year goes by, and I think we had 6 or 9 first-round picks that year, the most we ever had. And I had asked the league to give me special credentials so I could get in the back and help my clients to the interviews. So by a fluke, we're in the line to pick up our credentials. Satch Kermit, as you know, is an extremely intelligent man, very low-key, and sort of got a dry sense of humor. So Richard Howell is right next to me in the lines, behind me. And I go up, and Satch is handing out the credentials. And he gives me my little packet. And I said, Satch, were you able to get me those special passes that I asked for? He said, of course. And so Richard comes up and says, I want the same credentials as David Falk. And Satch turns to him and said, cryptically, are you the same man as David Falk? Now, you can take that any number of ways.
That's that.
You can take it any way you want. And Richard just dropped that in his tracks. I love Satch. He was
really, a good man.
Really good man.
He was the only coach that would call me out during the off season and just want to talk. I said, what do you want, Satch? He called me Horse. I just want to talk, see how you're doing, Horse. I said, I'm fine, Satch. I'm fine. Anything else? He was just a nice man. He was too nice. And that's why I don't think.
One last thing. I want to talk. So you come back to Boston in 77. Auerbach comes to our office on 17th Street to do the contract. We agree on the money. And I said,
with me, my contract?
Yeah, for you to go back to Boston.
Okay.
So I said, now, Red, this is a no-cut guarantee contract. He goes, what the does that mean? And so it means that you have to, no matter what happens, you got to pay him the money and you can't take him off the roster. He goes, bullshit. There's no way I'm agreeing to a contract where I can't take a guy off the roster. If I guarantee him the money, why do I have to keep him on the roster? I said, well, because he'll lose the pension fund. If you take him off the roster, he doesn't have 3 years. It affects how much money he'll get in the pension. So he goes, God damn it. What if I just pay him the pension? I said, that's fine if you want to agree. So with that contract, you had the first contract ever. That's the basis of the modern guarantee contract, where it gave you the money and forced the team to fund the pension fund. So you were a pioneer, and you didn't even know it.
No, I didn't. But listen to this. Now, people don't know this, and I never told anybody, but you guys had negotiated with Denver Nuggets that were going to pay me $50,000 more per year for 4 years if I went with Denver. So Donald Dell calls me and he says, okay, well, Denver's offering you, okay, first of all, let me set everything up. Red Auerbach talks to me, and probably after talking to you guys, he says, Kermit, I can't pay you more than Havlicek made. I can't pay you more than Dave Cowens. Even though you could get it in the market, I can't pay you more than these certain players. And because I love Red Auerbach, I said, Red, that's okay. And so when Donald Dell calls, he says, well, Kermit, they're offering you $250,000 a year for 4 years, which is $1 million. I don't know, it was something like that. He said, well, Kermit, they're offering you $50,000 more per year. I said, no, I'm not leaving Boston. I'm not leaving Red. He says, are you sure? I said, no, I like where I am, because at least they wanted me there. And so I had to be to Denver.
Of course, that's so important.
Yeah, and so then all of a sudden I was going to buy a house in Boston, and then Red Auerbach called me. He says, Kermit, don't buy anything. Looks like it's going to be a switch or franchise, and they want you to go with them to San Diego. He says, hold off, and that's when I went to San Diego.
All right, Carl, last story that I really got to go. This is great. You just made me think of it. That's nothing to do with basketball. It's a football story. So as you know, I did some football, and I had a really close friend in LA named Lee Steinberg, who was considered like the guru of representing all the quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. And Lee's a really smart guy. And so anyway, and he had his reputation was that he didn't recruit anyone, that the players called him. Mm-hmm. And I love Lee, but I know that was complete hogwash. But it bothered me. So one year, I don't know what year this was, like maybe around 90, maybe 93. They did an article on me in an airline magazine. And I get a call from this guy. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was one of my friends calling, playing a joke on me. I said, David, my name is Lynn. I'm a retired millionaire from Osborne Computer. I'm a very serious born-again Christian. And I have a very close friendship with an all-pro running back on the 49ers named Wendell Tyler. And after reading this article about you in the airline magazine, I wonder if you'd be interested in representing him. Now, I knew this one of my friends just played, like it's like a Lee Steinberg kind of thing, playing a joke on me because I complained that nobody was recruiting us. I said, sure, I'd love to represent him. He goes, well, like, what's the best way to follow this up? And so I said, well, why don't you just get on a plane and, come see me next Tuesday in Washington? He goes, how's 4 o'clock? I said, 4 o'clock is great. And I waited for the guy to say, hi, this is T.O., but it really was the guy. So he comes to Wendell. We had a meeting. And Wendell was a really nice guy. He really liked us. He knew we were professional. But he had an agent named Doc Daniels, Harold Doc Daniels, whose principal business was check cashing in LA.
Check cashing, yeah.
And on the side, he was an agent. So Wendell asked me after the meeting, he thought about it, and he said, would it be cool to have a follow-up meeting? Could I bring Doc? I said, Wendell, are you kidding me? You want to bring your current agent to meet us? You think he's going to try everything in his power to block it? I would do the same thing. So I said, okay, if you want to bring him. So Doc obviously is fighting for his life. He sees this big firm, very successful with all these superstar clients. So Wendell has 1 year left on his deal at $305,000. And Doc, to try to show Wendell that I don't know anything about football, says to me, okay, David, if Wendell picks you, how much money are you going to ask the 49ers for in a salary? Now, I hadn't even thought about it because I didn't think he was going to pick us. So I thought for like a minute, and I said, okay, we'll tell him we want to renegotiate the last year and do a 3-year deal for $2 million. And Doc goes like, $2 million? I said, okay, Doc, like, what would you ask for? He said, I'd ask for $3 million. I said, well, Doc, why don't you think big? Why don't you ask for $3 billion? And he goes, what do you mean? I said, okay, I'm Ed DeBartolo. And this is the agent business in a nutshell, okay? People just completely bullshitting their clients. I said, I'm Ed DeBartolo, and you come to see me to represent Wendell Tyler, who's got 1 year left at 305. And you asked me for a 3-year deal for $3 million. What do I tell you? And Doc says, I don't know. What do you tell me? I said, Doc, I'd love to pay Wendell $3 million, but I got this small problem. I got this guy on my team named Joe Montana, who's like the 2-time MVP, who won the Super Bowl for us. He's making $1.2 million a year. So if I give Wendell extension for $3 million less than 305, I'm going to pay him $1.35 a year, which is more than Joe Montana. And I just can't do that. I'm sorry. I'd like to, but I just can't. So if that's what you think Wendell's worth, why don't you play out the last year and come back and see me next year? And if Wendell's worth more in the market than Joe Montana, I'm happy to pay him. Now, what do you say, Doc? And Doc thinks for a minute. This really perplexed him. And he said, if you told me that, I would tell you that Wendell would be very unhappy if you said that. So I said, really? Now, how do I respond to that, Doc? And he's, I'm Ed DeBartolo. I said, I don't know. I said, here's what I tell you. I said, Doc, I'm a really wealthy guy, but I probably spend 4 or 5 days a week, like going to practice, watching college games, trying to get a feel of how do I make the Niners better? I want to win another Super Bowl. And if Wendell's unhappy making 305, my advice is quit the 49ers and get a job that'll pay him more money. We're done. So they leave, and Doc convinces them that I'm not the guy. I'm not aggressive enough. I'm not vicious enough. The $2 million is, $2 million, which is an increase of $1.7 million for 2 years. Going from 305 to 900, like that's not enough. And so about a month goes by, and I'm having dinner in Washington with the president of the team, Carmen Policy. And he's laughing his ass off. He's telling me a story. He said, David, you wouldn't believe it. This freaking guy, Doc Daniels, walks in and has the nerve to ask us to pay freaking Wendell Tyler $3 million for 3 years. I said, really? Like, what'd you tell him? So what do we tell him? He said, what are you, stupid? We can't pay more than Joe Montana. If that's what you want, play it out and come back next year. And if you're worth more than Joe. And a week later, Wendell breaks his ankle and never plays another game in the league. And so it's a business where, when Kermit said before, like, be honest, I'm always honest, because I think that the day you stop being honest, you lose the trust of your clients for really big decisions. But there are a lot of times it's hard to be honest because that the player doesn't want you to tell him what he needs to hear. He wants you to tell him what he wants to hear. And you have to see if you have the confidence and the courage, the commitment to stand up to your clients, and if you don't, they'll never respect you. And it's especially true before you get the clients, because you meet these, like I met a player at Michigan named Desmond Howard, who's a terrific young man. His godmother was a paralegal in the largest law firm in America called Jones Day. He's from Cleveland. He went to St. Joseph's High School in Cleveland. This is 1990, I'm going to say 3. So the lawyer she worked for was a really, really smart guy named Dick Saylor. And he went to the owners of the 3 teams in Cleveland, the Cleveland Browns in football, the Cleveland Indians in baseball, and the Cleveland Cavaliers in basketball, and said, look, I'm trying to pick an agent for Desmond. Is there somebody you'd recommend? And all 3 people said, oh, God, Dick, that's simple. You want the best agent in the country, you should hire David Falk. And I've never done baseball. I was very flattered. Never met the owner of the Cleveland Browns. So we go to meet Desmond, and we have in Dick Saylor's office. We had a great meeting with him. In the last minute, the player's going to ask you what I call the question. He's going to ask you a question that he's going to want you to answer a certain way. But the way he's asking, the question he's asking, you can't answer. You can't give him the answer he wants because it's not the truth. So he asked me the question, where do you think I'll go with the draft? Now, in football, to the best of my recollection, in the history of the NFL, there's only been 3 wide receivers drafted number 1. One was a guy named Dave Parks for the 49ers, and I'm going to say like 57. One was Keyshawn Johnson, and I think there was one more. Wide receivers don't go number 1 because the theory is that the difference between a wide receiver in the first round and a wide receiver in the second round is small, but the difference between a lineman or a linebacker is huge. So I said to Desmond, look, I know you want me to tell me you go number 1 because you just won the Heisman. And I know you're friends with Rocket Ishmael, who probably would have been the 4th guy last year because he's a kick returner, whatever, running back. You're going to go 4 to 6. And you can see in his face he was crushed.
4 to 6 round?
4 to 6 in the first round. We'll go.
Okay.
And so he decided to go with Lee Steinberg, my friend, who promised him he'd go number 1. So the draft came. What number do you think he went?
I don't know.
What's halfway between 4 and 6?
The 5th pick.
Oh, fifth.
He went 5th to the Washington Redskins in our backyard. So we picked Lee to do the contract, and he asked us, would we do the marketing? And I said, sure. So Lee asked, so then Lee was embarrassed that he didn't go 1. So he promised Desmond that he would be the highest paid offensive player in the draft. Except there was one small problem, a little bit like San Francisco having Joe Montana. Washington had 3 all-pro wide receivers, Art Monk from Syracuse, Gary Clark from Gettysburg, and Reggie Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked at Desmond as a kick returner. So Lee asked for a lot of money. They said no. They made him an offer, and they sat on it for 7 weeks. 7 weeks go by. Dick Saylor calls all of us to Cleveland, me and Lee. And he says in front of Lee, he was pissed off. He was pissed off at Lee because he hadn't been candid with him about the draft thing. And he was obviously hadn't been candid with him about what he could expect to make. And so he says to me, David, how much do you think the holdout is hurting Desmond's marketing? Now, the honest answer was it destroyed it. The fans were really pissed off at this punk college kid, asking for more money, than 3 all-pro wide receivers, and he's not going to play that much. But I like Lee, and even though I was upset that he hadn't been as candid as he should have been in recruiting, there's a certain code of honor amongst the better people. And I said, look, Dick, the contract is the steak and the marketing is the dessert. Let Lee do his job, get him whatever he can get him. And when he's done, we'll deal with whatever the aftermath is. And Lee ended up getting basically the same deal he could have gotten him on the first day, and the marketing was gone. And, you want to cry because you want the guy who you know that he knows that you're the best. You've just been recommended by 3 owners. And the reason you can't get him is because you're trying to tell him no matter what you ask me, I'm always going to be straight with you. You may not like the answer, but it's my best. Now, it's a lot easier for me to tell him to go 1 than to go 5, but I know he's not going to go 1. So, down the road, you have a lot of very important decisions to make. You go through situations like Kermit went through, or John Lucas went through, getting busted out of the league, or Matombo when I wouldn't let him get married because the girl didn't sign the prenup on time.
Oh.
And you have to those guys have to really trust you in crunch time when Kermit's sitting and, wants to know, should he go to Boston or Denver? You're making life-changing decisions. And if you lie in recruiting, like you've lost them, it's over. They're going to remember that. And so it's one of the most frustrating things because everybody lies. I say 95% of the guys lie, especially in recruiting. They tell them they're going to go places. We had a guy, I'll tell you what, last one, I got a million last ones, Kermit. I got a call from a guy in Oakland in 1993. He was cousins with a player at the University of Arkansas named Scotty Thurman, who was a really great shooting 2 guard. So I go down to Ruston, Louisiana, home of famous Baltimore Colts quarterback Burt Jones, number 7.
Oh, yeah, Bert. Yeah.
Meet his parents. Parents were lovely people. They both were graduates of Grambling. His father was on the city council, very intelligent people. And they said to me, like, David, what do you think? Now, in my career, T.O., this will blow your mind. I've been this almost 50 years. I have never once ever recommended a player leave school early. I don't believe in it. Now, a lot of players didn't listen to me and left, or sometimes their college coaches would tell them to leave. I told Patrick to go back. I told Danny Ferry to go back, Keith Van Horn. These are 3 guys who went 1, 2, and 3 in the draft. It wasn't like they were going to go 20. So they asked me what I thought. I said, look, your son is not going to go in the first round. You have nothing to think about. He needs to go back to Arkansas, have a great senior year, and get drafted in the first round with his guarantees. And I said, well, David, we just met with a football agent from Houston who told us they thought he'd go in the top 20. I said, who cares? Like, how would he know he's going to go in the top 20? Does he have a commitment?
Right.
And so I try to convince them, but, you know, their parents, it's their kid, and they're really nice people. And what the guy said appealed to him. So Scotty came out as a junior. What number did he get drafted, Kermit?
I don't know.
0. He wasn't drafted at all. 2 rounds, wasn't drafted. The dad called me a year later because he was very, very upset that he didn't listen. And Lee was crying on the phone. He was a lovely man. And he said, God, Mr. Falk, you know, I said, look, you don't have to apologize to me. I understand it's appealing to you and these people, you know, talking smoke in your ear. But you have to understand, like, you asked me for my professional advice. I'm like a doctor. And I'm telling you, if you don't stop smoking, you know, so I love to smoke. I said, I know, if you don't stop, you're going to get lung cancer. And so one of the most frustrating things of all time is to sit in front of a kid and know you're going to lose him, because I had another one, Kermit. You remember Bill Strickland?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So Bill Strickland was an African-American attorney I hired, who I love. He's a great guy. And we got invited out to Ohio State to meet Keith Byers, who's a great running back from Ohio State.
Yeah.
Now, I curse too much when I talk sometimes. And Bill said to me, David, I want to remind you, Keith's father is a reverend. Please, whatever you do, do not curse. Now, you shouldn't tell someone that, because it's in your mind, you almost curse.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we had a great meeting with him. At the end of the meeting, his father says, David, like, I really like you guys, you know, love the fact you have an African-American attorney who's a senior person in your company. Where do you think Keith's going to go in the draft? Here you go. Like, as Ronald Reagan said, here we go again. I said, well, Reverend Byers, in my opinion, Keith will go in the top 10 and he'll be the second running back pick. And he got really upset. And he said, how can I choose you if you don't think my son is the best running back in the country? I said, Reverend Byers, the truth is, it doesn't matter what I think, because I'm not a team. The teams are drafting him. Agents don't draft the players. And the way it works, they have a scouting system called Blusto, and they rate every player at every position. And the player who's rated ahead of him in the draft in 1986, has the highest rating of any player at any position between 1968, when O.J. Simpson came out, and today. And he said, really, who's that player? I said, his name is Bo Jackson. He's going to get drafted number 1, and your son will be the second running back, and I believe he'll go in the top 10. So we didn't get Keith Byers. He went with a really good guy who died, Brig Owens, who was a player on the Redskins, so I really liked.
Yeah, I know Brig. Yeah.
Brig was a really classy guy.
I think number 23.
I would bet, exactly, and I would bet my house that Brig Owens did not tell the Byers that Keith was going to go number 1. But so the draft came, and Keith went number 10 to the Eagles, and he was the second running back pick. Now, you go through situations like that, and it's just beyond frustrating. I don't know how to explain it. It's like Kermit wanted to know why Connor's on the same team, or Bill Russell wanted to know why he wasn't the Northern California Player of the Year. It's because there's politics, and in our business, the vast majority of agents either puff or straight out lie about where guys are going to go. You know, last story, and I'm really going to go, Kermit, because I'm running out of time, but in 1987, we had our first Duke client ever in 1986. It was Johnny Dawkins. This is a great story, Kermit. I go down to Duke to meet Johnny, who's from Washington, D.C., Mackin High School. Mm-hmm. He's the first major player Coach K ever recruited. And Donald didn't go. He was supposed to go, but he didn't go. And instead of saying, hey, David, I really hope you do a good job, he said, look, don't screw it up. Just make sure that we get a return visit, for Johnny to come to the office. So Duke started a screening committee. Johnny was the first guy ever in the screening committee. So it was the head of a guy named John Weistart, who was a law professor, very smart guy, wrote a textbook on sports law. A guy named Chris Kennedy from the athletic department, Coach K, and there was a fourth guy, I can't remember. And so I'm trying to make a presentation. And after 2 minutes, the guy from the business school interrupts, says, excuse me, what do you think about taking intangible depreciation on real estate investments? And after like 4 or 5 of these interruptions, stuff that had nothing to do with what I was talking about, I could see Johnny was done. Like he checked out. It was the worst meeting I probably have ever had. But Coach K, and so he wanted to go with Advantage, which is now called Octagon. But they had signed Lenny Bias, who was the second pick in the draft. And Coach K thought it was better for Johnny to be with us and get, more attention. So he forced him to come he literally came with him to Washington. Now, at the time, I had a really cute Jamaican secretary named Andrea Brown. And I had a standing rule that if 4 people called, Coach K, John Thompson, Michael Jordan, and Patrick Ewing, never put them on hold. Don't tell them I'm tied up. Find me and let me know if I want to take the call. So we're in Donald's office meeting with Coach K and Johnny. And John Thompson calls up to invite me to lunch. And my secretary is in a frenzy. She's thinking 4 people on the list. One of them's on the phone. One of them's at the office. What do I do? So she panicked. She said, Coach, David's in a meeting with, Coach K to try to sign Johnny Dawkins. So no problem. So we're in the middle of the meeting. And there's not a knock on the door. There's like a crash, and the door flies open. And Big John walks in with Miss Fenlon, his academic coordinator. And he goes right over to Johnny. Now, in Washington, D.C., Kermit knows because he lived in Washington. John used to hang out at the boys club. He's like God to these young players. He's a coach at Georgetown. And, he just won the national title in 1984, first black coach to win a national championship. So John goes over to Johnny and said, how you doing, son? He goes, doing great, coach. How you doing? Goes over to Mike and says, how you doing, coach? And he points to me. He says to Johnny, this is my guy. If you go with this guy, he'll do a great job for you. He'll never let you down. He points to Donald. And he said, this guy, F him. He goes, I don't like him. And he walks out. He was there for like 30 seconds. And I was so embarrassed because it looked like a setup. And I said to Coach K, I said, Coach, you have to believe me. I had no freaking idea that John was going to come. And he said, David, are you out of your mind? There's not a human being alive that could have gotten John Thompson to do what he just did if he didn't want to do it.
That's true. That's true.
Anyway, so we signed Johnny, and the next year we go down to meet Tommy Amaker. Mm-hmm. Tommy is the first ever National Defensive Player of the Year. It was the Hank Ibo Award. I've known Tommy since he's 10 years old through John Lucas. He was like John Lucas's protege from DC, really intelligent guy. And he's only meeting 2 people, me and my former law partner, Lee Fentress, who's a really sharp guy and a great recruiter. So I start the presentation, and Mike stops me after 5. I said, David, look, Tommy knows who you are. He's known you his whole life. He knows you did a great job for Johnny. Cut the bullshit. Just tell me where you think he's going to go in the draft. So at the time, there were 3 rounds of the draft back in 1987. And I said, Coach, it really doesn't matter what number he goes. What really matters is that he goes to a team that doesn't have a bias against small guards, because at that time, a lot of the guards in the league were really getting big, like Dennis Johnson, Magic Johnson, and Tommy's like 6 feet dripping wet, 150 pounds. He goes, no, I understand that, but where do you think he'll go? And so I said, I think we'll go somewhere between mid-second and mid-third. Tommy's chin is hitting the table.
Second or third round.
Yeah. Second or third round. Yeah. And I can see he's really disappointed. So I'm watching this. You have to pay attention to the body language of these guys to see how they're taking what you're saying. And he is obviously very upset. So I said, Tommy, I know you met some other people. I know you met one other guy. What's the consensus of where they thought you'd go in the draft? He said, well, the last guy in here told me he thought there was a really strong chance that I'd go number 20 to Houston in the first round. And so I go like this, come on. He didn't say that. And he got really mad. Now he's really mad because I'm laughing. And he said, why do you think it's so funny that I can go to Houston number 20 in the first round? I said, Tom, I think it's funny because Houston doesn't have a pick in the first round.
Oh, wow.
So a week goes by and he calls me and he said, David, look, you know, I really want to go with you. You know, I really respect you, but I can't go with you. I said, why not? He said, because you're going to sign Muggsy. And Muggsy's another small guard. I said, Tommy, Muggsy's could go in the lottery, the top 15 picks. He is not remotely competing with you. And besides, like, why do you care? So I care because Lee Fetchers promised me that he's not even going to try to sign Muggsy, that he's going to put his attention on me. I said, really? He told you that? He said, yeah. I said, well, you know, you're both in the ACC. Do you know Muggsy Bogues? He said, yeah, I know him well. I said, you have his phone number? I said, sure. So of course I have. I said, I want you to call him and ask him, Muggsy, what are you doing tomorrow afternoon at 12 p.m.? And he said, what's he going to tell me? He's going to tell you I'm meeting Lee Fetchers in my apartment at noon, which he did. And so I ended up getting both of them. And I respect Lee, but like, my point is like recruiting is like a cesspool, and people will say or do anything to get these kids as clients. And you lose so many of them because they don't want to hear the truth.
Yeah, they do. Now, was he drafted? Did he ever make pro ball?
Who's that?
Tommy Amaker?
So he got drafted by Seattle, and in the third round, just like I told, and he got cut in training camp. Immediately went back to Durham, enrolled in business school at Duke, became an assistant coach, and ended up becoming the head coach at Seton Hall at age 27. Then he went to Michigan, and now he's at Harvard. And you know, we're really close. I've never represented him officially, more like a friend, a mentor. He loves Harvard. He's brought the first Ivy League title ever to Harvard when he was there. But, you know, I can remember that meeting like it was yesterday. This is a guy I've known, you know, let's say he's 22. I've known him for, 12 years. And he knows I represent John Lucas. He knows what I've been through with John Lucas. You know, Kermit, you know John well. I didn't recruit John. I didn't sign John. I wrote John's contract. That was my job. That was my first year. But once he's in the league, Donald Lee, who did his contract, wanted zero to do with taking care of him. So that fell to me. And I loved it. I mean, that was, Kermit said yesterday.
John was something else for him.
I learned everything you could learn in my first 2 years of this business with John. When Phil Ford came out in 1978 as the National Player of the Year, I told Phil, before you start, whatever you're thinking of doing it, John's already done it. I'm not a rookie anymore. I'm experienced. And you go through all the high. John went through a lot of highs with John. He went through a lot of lows with John. He got thrown out of the league, and it grows you up fast.
And he was a good guy, though. He just had that substance abuse, because I was one time, he says, Kermit, I'm leaving tickets for you. I said, okay. There's no tickets there. He didn't leave any tickets to the game and stuff like that. But, I loved him to death, too. One thing, when we were in Japan together, that was a fun trip, though. It was. Moses, did you guys represent Moses, too?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I was telling you.
The best trip, we took 8 guys to Italy and Spain, barnstormers. Moses, Adrian, Buck Williams, Phil Ford. Those are the 4 main guys that we had, like Bobby Jones, Wally, Tom McMillan. So Moses was sitting in the back bus looking just like you, TJ. They had big headphones on. This is like a beautiful bus, like a tour bus for a band. So everyone's in the regular seats, but Moses has the whole back seat. And everyone's sleeping or listening to the headphones. And every couple hours, Moses would wake up and start telling jokes.
And he mumbled too. People don't realize that.
I know Moses well. And I couldn't understand the punchline of one freaking joke he told. So after the second day, I went up to Adrian Kermit and I said, AD, I hope this doesn't sound like bad, but I didn't get the punchline of one of his jokes. He said, David, none of us got the punchline. No. We just waited. Moses told the joke, gave the punchline. Then he started laughing. When Moses started laughing, we all laughed.
Yeah. I told T.O. last night when we were in Japan, he bought a $5,000 Camry. Okay. And you took us to the place. In 5 minutes on a bus, springs were flying out the camera. And Moses, I'm not going to use the bad words. No, I'm gonna take this back to back. And we back there laughing, and what was his wife's name then? Oh, he gave her the hardest time.
Althea.
Oh yes. Well, she won't talk about. She ain't gonna talk. We taking this camera back. This he was his ML. We taking this ML back.
That's a good invitation. All right, Kerm. So Moses is a rookie. This is my first. I just started working part-time at ProServe, and Moses is a rookie for the Utah Stars, the ABA, 1974. He breaks his leg, and he comes to Washington. He's got to get the radio fixed on his car. He's got to get new tires. And Lee Fetcher says to me, who's his agent, David, I want you to spend the day with Mo. Now, for me, I was in heaven. Are you kidding me? I'm going to meet this like great young player, almost by tomorrow. So Moses had this huge 450 SEL Mercedes. We get in the car, and Kermit, I don't know if you remember the building we were in that had a really, like, getting out of the parking lot was like a jigsaw puzzle. It was really hard.
Yeah.
So Moses pulling out.
From your office.
Yeah. So Moses pulling out of the parking lot. I go, Mo, who's the best player in the ABA? And he goes like this, Gurd. I say, excuse me? He goes, Gurd. I said, Dr. J? He goes, no, man, Gurd. Like 9 times. I'm sweating. I don't understand a word he's saying. He's saying Gervin, but he only Gerv. He's saying Gerv. Yeah. Gerv. One syllable. For the next 2 hours, I didn't ask a question. We didn't talk. I was so embarrassed. I couldn't understand. And the reason, not because he didn't want to talk. And
he didn't pronounce his words so well either.
But when he didn't want to talk, he mumbled. When he wanted, I've heard him give speeches. He's not a great speaker, but he can speak. But when he didn't want you to bother him, he would mumble. And after I'm just sweating in the car. I spent like 4 hours with the guy.
Moses was something else. You know, some guys in the league, I try to tell T.O. and everybody else, didn't have a personality. But Moses was so fun-loving. Before game, I said, Moses, you ain't going to score a point today. I'm going to stop you. I said, you ain't going to do nothing. And he always had a good game, but you could kid him and joke about him. He'd be laughing. But, I mean, if somebody tried to tell me that other day that Rodman's the best rebounder, he didn't compare to Moses at all.
Rodman's a great rebounder, but Moses
could put the ball back in the hole. Dennis Rodman would get a offensive rebound. He had to throw it back out because he couldn't score.
So T.O., check this out. So in 1976, the leagues merged. Mm-hmm. There were five ABA teams: the Nets, the Pacers, the Spurs, Denver, and the St. Louis Spirits with Kermit's good friend Ron Boone. Moses was on the Spurs, so they wouldn't let the Spirits in. But they did agree to give him a perpetual share.
What team they did let in?
The St. Louis Spurs.
Yes, Spirits.
So they had a dispersal draft for the players on the Spurs in the NBA. By a fluke of draft picks or trades, Portland had the first and the third pick in the dispersal draft. With the first pick,
why?
Because of trades.
Oh, okay.
So with the first pick, they took Maurice Lucas. And with the third pick, they took Moses. But Jack Ramsey didn't like Moses, and he never thought Moses was going to be a good player in the NBA. So during the exhibition season, I went to see you, Kermit. You had a doubleheader. The first game was, so Moses was on Portland.
Yes.
Okay. So the first game was Portland and it must have been backwards. No. Here's what happened. So Ramsey didn't like Moses and he traded him to Buffalo.
Yeah.
And Buffalo in turn traded him to Houston. So the second game of the doubleheader is Portland, Seattle. And the second game of the doubleheader is Portland, LA. Kerr was playing for the Lakers. And the first game was Houston and somebody else. At halftime, Moses had 28 and 17, and he finished with 55 and 28. 55 points. And so at halftime, Mendy Rudolph, the most famous ref, comes up to Jack Ramsey, who's watching the game, and says, you know what, Jack? You're right. This guy's never going to make it in our league.
Moses was something else. I mean, he was so funny during the games and everything else like that. But he was continuously or as a rebounder to me during my time, he was the best rebounder in the league. And the thing is, it's just Maurice Lucas, you guys had him too.
Yeah. So here's what happened. So listen, now let's get this. Let's get to Kermit. So the second game is L.A. Portland. Maurice comes in the NBA, and they put him on the cover of Sports Illustrated as one of the enforcers, one of the toughest guys in the league.
Right.
I was on that cover. I wasn't that cover. I was in that too.
Right?
I was
Anyway, so I'm watching the game. In the first quarter, Maurice and Kermit have a little thing going on. They had some words. Second quarter got a little more intense. They had a little more words. And the third quarter, they really, he threw an elbow at Kermit. So I asked Kermit after the game. I said, "What was going on with you and Luke?" He said, "David gave me like a little shove in the first quarter." I said, "Luke, cut that stuff out." Second quarter, he gave me another shove. I said, "Luke, tell you, cut that stuff out." Third quarter, he elbowed me in the head. I said, "Luke, if you do it one more time, I'm just going to have to kill you."
I think I remember telling him, I said, one of us going to be in a hospital. I know one of us going to be in a hospital. And the thing about Maurice, he had a heavyweight champion's mentality. He was just a tough guy. He really was. And I could tell you stories about Maurice with Portland. When I was sent to Portland because of the trade for Bill Walton, Lucas was hurt. And Michael Thompson was hurt. That's the reason I made the All-Star team that year, because they were all hurt. Now, when Maurice came back, he was one of the top power forwards in the league, if not the top power forwards. But I was playing really well. In practice, he was beating everybody up. I mean, just elbowing everybody. And so we go to Chicago for a game, and he is hurt. Brewer. He's hurt like 3 or 4 guys in practice. I go to Jack. I said, "Jack, it doesn't bother me. I'll come off the bench." He said, "Why, Kermit?" I said, "Because Luke is going to kill all of us in practice if you don't put him back in the starting lineup." I said, "I don't mind coming off the bench." I mean, he was just elbowing people, but he was a tough guy.
He was a great guy.
He was a great guy.
He was a great guy. He was more like, he had like the Sonny Liston stare, but he wouldn't mess with Kermit.
No, but the thing is, though, we got to be good friends. But, I told him, I said, I thought he was the best power forward in the league. But he always intimidated people. When I was with the Lakers and playing them, we had beat them 3 out of 3 before I had knee surgery when I was with the Lakers. So I thought we could have won the championship that year. But when I got hurt, Don Ford came in to start. He elbowed Don Ford at the beginning of the game, and it was over. It was over. Then I went to the Clippers, and he elbowed Swin Nader. So Swin said something smart to him, and this is the beginning of the game. 1 minute later, Swin got all this blood coming out of his mouth because Maurice had elbowed him. See, he started off the game with the elbow to see who he could intimidate. And I just tell him, I said, "You elbow me, one of us going to be in a hospital." I said, "I promise you, one of us going to be in a hospital." And he said, "Well, you already got in trouble." I said, "Well, I'll get in trouble again," because I said, "I'm not going to let you just bully people around." And you know what? He was a good player, though, about 20, 10. And I think he should be in the Hall of Fame, because at that point, David, he was the best power forward in the league. Just like Marcus Johnson should be in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, no question.
Yeah, and I talked to his son the other day, and he was the best small forward. After Dr. J went downhill because he was getting older, Marcus Johnson was the #1 small forward. And I said, why can't he be in? Because I think the drug situation or something that came up with Marcus. But he should be in a Hall of Fame. Terry Cummings should be in a Hall of Fame. Bernard King's in a Hall of Fame, isn't he, David?
I don't think so. I'm not sure. Now, there's a great, when you won that championship, so they won the, well, you won it in 77, Portland.
Oh, no, Portland. I wasn't on the team, though.
Yeah, the Portland won it. Portland won
in
in 77.
Yeah.
And I was out west. We had 4 guys in the draft that year. We had Marcus at 3, Kenny Carr at 6, Bernard at 7, and Tommy LaGarde at 9. And I was out talking to all the GMs because a few of my undergraduates, 3 of them, trying to figure out where they're going to go. So I go up to Portland to see Game 6, to see Wally Walker, his rookie year. And he didn't play at all in the last game. So Portland wins. They beat the Sixers. And in the locker room, Porter comes up to Wally and said, Are you upset that you didn't play more in the final game? He said, well, I know Coach Ramsey thought that Bobby Gross could do a better job on Dr. J. He goes, well, how did you feel about that? He said, well, tell you the truth, I thought I could have held him for 35 a game by myself.
Yeah, you want to play. People say that all the time. If I was on a team that won a championship and didn't get in a game, that wouldn't mean anything to me.
No, he was cool. He was just trying to be funny. I thought it was a very funny line.
Oh man, let me tell you something. You had people like Daryl Dawkins. I told T.O. about Daryl Dawkins. I mean, people don't remember who he was, but he was a monster in the sense like that. And that Philadelphia team might have been one of the most talented teams in the history of basketball, but they weren't disciplined. They weren't disciplined.
Your guy, World Be Free.
Oh, he was my teammate.
Jelly Bean Joe Bryant.
Yeah, yes. Or you had
Doug Collins. Collins.
Mix. You had Steve Mix. You had Carwell Jones.
Yep.
You had Catchings.
Bobby Jones on the team.
Bobby Jones. No, yeah, at first he wasn't. He was with Denver at first in my career. Then he went to.
Yeah, he was with them. They traded him for McGinnis.
Yeah. Oh, McGinnis. You know what? McGinnis was something else too. See, I'm getting the years mixed up.
About earlier.
Yeah. I mean, but the thing is, I tell you one thing about Daryl Dawkins. He was terrifying to me because I told T.O. the story last night. When I went to Boston, we would play Philadelphia on Friday and Sunday. The Sunday game would be in Boston, nationally televised game. But I was staying in the hotel, and the Philadelphia 76ers would stay in that same hotel. So I go down to eat before the game on Sunday, and here comes Daryl Dawkins. And I said, oh my God. I said, Daryl, come eat breakfast with me. Daryl said, okay. And I said, because I wanted to butter him up. I didn't want him to dunk the ball and break the backboard down on me. I said, Daryl, your jump shot's been looking really good. Gosh, you've been working on that jump shot. Oh, yeah, I've been working on that jump shot. I said, well, okay, just don't dunk on me and break the backboard down on me. And so he ordered breakfast. I told T.O. probably 14 scrambled eggs, about 5 to 8 pieces of toast, a half gallon of orange juice, a whole side of bacon. And I said, Daryl, how do you know what your teammates want? This ain't no for no teammate. This is mine. I mean, no. I said, oh my goodness, really funny guy. But I didn't want him dunking on me. I couldn't do anything with his strength. He was just too strong, and he could palm the ball like a grapefruit. I mean, it was a joke. And then when he dunked on you, he would tell you what dunk he's going to dunk on you. And then you had Dr. J. Then you had either George McGinnis. You couldn't win. That's like
they had a great team.
Just like against Boston. I mean, you couldn't win. I mean, I like checking McHale because McHale wasn't physical. I didn't want to check Bird. Bird had you running around, running everywhere around. But Bird was a good guy. I mean, he wouldn't talk trash unless you talk trash. But he would tell the coach, don't put a white guy on me. That's disrespect, putting a white guy. He would say that. He didn't want a white guy checking him. He wanted to get a brother to destroy a brother. He wanted to destroy a brother. But he was.
Hey, T.O., you think we could do this for like a whole day? So 2.5 hours. This is overtime for me. So
well, here's what we do. We're going to break this up to a lot, and we're going to edit it, and we'll let you know. Tell them what it'll be on.
The video will be on YouTube, and then we'll break it. We're gonna have.
Send me a text when it's on. Like to see it. Fun to do it. I can talk to Kermit all day. Yeah. Glad to see you back in action, big boy.
How to put it all in perspective.